A kindergarten teacher who's never left Harlem is transported to a twisted version of New York City. Listen as we discuss Michael Jackson's interest in Peter Parker, a very horny Tin Man, and the labor laws in Oz. Ease on down the road as we find out if The Wiz stands the test of time.
Test of time, James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today? James says gladiator with a glutton. Alan says as a father, blah blah. It's the test of time, James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today? Test of time, James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Test of Time. I'm James Brief, and joining me, as always, is my buddy and pal and my partner on the podcast and the director of this podcast, Alan Noah. How you doing, Al?
Hi, I am doing very well, thank you. How are you doing, James?
I'm doing okay. You know, I'm really excited to talk about The Wiz. It's a movie that I knew only one thing about, and I freaking loved it. And that is Ease On Down the Road. I knew that song. Yeah. That's the only thing I knew about this movie. You know, I want to see Michael Jackson, and I never seen Diana Ross in a film. And it got me thinking about singers and rappers that go into film. It's a great success.
We just recently talked about The Cell, starring Jennifer Lopez. She's been in a handful of movies. I don't think I've seen any of her other movies. I know Made in Manhattan is always just kind of mocked, along with Geely, but Out of Sight got some good buzz. One of my favorite movies from growing up starred David Bowie. I love Labyrinth, and that is kind of still one of the first things I think about when I think about David Bowie. Obviously, he's an amazing musician with countless phenomenal songs, but there is still a little part of me that just pictures him as Jareth from Labyrinth.
There's some people that have made complete transition, like Will Smith. I think of him more as an actor now than a musician.
I think that more often musicians don't go the Will Smith route. They kind of go more the Diana Ross, Michael Jackson route, where they are in a couple movies and then they kind of go back to music. And it's not even necessarily that they're bad at acting. It's just that that's kind of more where they want to focus their attention. Not always. I guess you can do kind of an even mix. I mean, Lady Gaga was in A Star is Born and the Joker sequel that bombed, but now she's going to be in the new season of Wednesday, and she's still making music. So I guess you can balance both if that's what you really want to do.
Actors like Cher, the Academy Award, Jennifer Hudson, Academy Award, Will Smith, Academy Award, in the same way that I think wrestlers often become good actors because part of that job is acting. I think that in a lot of ways, celebrities and singers, they might have to kind of act and put on a persona all the time. And in some ways, you can kind of translate that to being behind the camera with a director.
When you think about it, we have done movies on this podcast centered around musicians who were acting. Off the top of my head, there was Cool as Ice with fucking Vanilla Ice. There was House Party with Kid and Play. There was Purple Rain with Prince and The Bodyguard with Whitney Houston. I'm sure I'm forgetting some others. But even just among those, Kid and Play and Vanilla Ice were not huge names. Whitney Houston and Prince also weren't huge names at the time that they made those movies. Michael Jackson was not a huge artist when this movie came out. He was basically still known as the kid from the Jackson 5. He was not yet the king of pop. And when you think about it, if Michael Jackson had really wanted to do more movies in the 80s when he was on top of the world, no one would have stopped him. I would imagine that studios would have been happy to have given him more movies. He really didn't, though. He didn't really go into acting. I mean, he did Captain EO, which was that short film for Epcot, but I don't think he ever had a role as big as the Scarecrow in this movie.
He was in Moonwalker. I mean, obviously, he had the choice of doing anything in the world that he wanted to, but he didn't really pursue this. Although I had read that Michael Jackson had pursued buying the rights to the Spider-Man film rights because he wanted to cast himself as Peter Parker Spider-Man. Have you ever heard about that?
What? Really?
Yeah, that's a real thing.
Oh, okay. I had not heard that. And I also completely forgot about the movie Moonwalker, which he starred in and co-wrote. And maybe that's why he didn't do other movies, because that movie kind of bombed. And I completely forgot that it even existed. But let's get into The Wiz. So this movie is also inspired by The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, the book from 1900. So some of the plot will probably sound familiar if you've seen The Wizard of Oz. But the movie centers around Dorothy, a shy kindergarten teacher who has never left Harlem. After her Auntie Em encourages her to take a job as a high school teacher, Dorothy and her dog Toto are swept away in a snowstorm to the land of Oz, which looks a bit like New York City. When Dorothy arrives in Oz, she accidentally kills the Wicked Witch of the East. The Good Witch of the North tells Dorothy that in order to get home, she should follow the Yellow Brick Road and find the Wiz, the leader of Oz. On her journey, she meets the Scarecrow, Tin Man, and Cowardly Lion, who join her in the hopes that the Wiz will grant them a brain, a heart, and courage. The Wiz says he won't help them unless they kill the Wicked Witch of the West, which Dorothy is able to do fairly easily. But the Wiz is a fraud who can't bring Dorothy home. Luckily, the Good Witch of the South appears and shows Dorothy how to get back to Harlem. So, James, when this movie came out in 1978, it did not do well, right? It was kind of a dud.
Yeah, this is one of those well-known flops. Certainly at the time, it was highly publicized because it's one of those films that was highly marketed, and there was big hype for this. After the enormous success of the stage musical, won Best Tony for Best Musical and Best Score. So on October 1st, 1978, this film opened. It had a $24 million budget, the highest budget ever for a musical movie. I've seen two different numbers, but I've seen it earn as low as $13 million and as much as $21 million domestically. Yeah, that's not that good. But interestingly, I read that because of the hype, the movie rights for the Wiz were sold to CBS before the release for $10 million. So they got lucky there. Due to this flop, this was the last big budget all-black cast until, for decades, until pretty much a Black Panther.
Wow.
You'd either have all-black casts with smaller budgets, acclaimed films like Boys in the Hood, Hustle and Flow, and Tyler Perry's films, or you have large budgets, but films like Django Unchained, Bad Boys, those are not all black films. Those are films with black leads.
Right.
This film, had it been a success, there really would have been I believe that there would have been a very different history of African-American led films.
You're probably right. And I watched this movie with my daughter. I mentioned last week she's really into Wizard of Oz and really excited about Wicked. So I told her that we should watch The Wiz. It's the same kind of story, but with an all-black cast. She was into it. And while we were watching the credits, she asked if all of the people who helped make the movie were also black. And I said, well, you know what? That's a really good question, but I'm not sure. Really, the only two names that I knew their race from the credits were Quincy Jones, who of course I know is black, and Joel Schumacher, who wrote the movie, who I know is white. Sidney Lumet, who directed the movie, that's a name I'd heard of. I know that he's directed lots of acclaimed movies, but I wasn't sure if he was white or black. I, of course, since looked it up, and he is white. And, just doing a little bit of research, really, Quincy Jones was one of the few people in the crew who were black. There were an awful lot of white people behind the scenes as producers, writer, director, all throughout the production. And it does seem like having Joel Schumacher and Sidney Lumet as writer and director, respectively, was a mistake. Not necessarily because they're white, but because they don't really have a full understanding of the Black experience, which, from what I've heard, is really central to The Wiz, the musical that this movie is based on. And Joel Schumacher doesn't know what it's like to be Black, neither does Sidney Lumet. And these guys kind of put their fingerprints all over the movie. And apparently a lot of the changes that they made from the musical to the movie just didn't work and pissed off people who really love the musical, who then went to see this movie excited to see a big screen adaptation of this Broadway show, and were then very disappointed by a lot of the changes that were made.
Apparently, some of the favorite songs from the Broadway production are not in the film at all, or switched around to other people. I found that interesting that in the 70s, they put $24 million into this all-black film, and they hired the best people. I mean, you got Richard Pryor, and you got Diana Ross, but they didn't trust the $24 million to a Black director.
Right. And the movie was originally not going to star Diana Ross. It was going to star the actress who was playing the role of Dorothy in the musical, Stephanie Mills. And Diana Ross found out that there was going to be a movie about The Wiz, and she lobbied hard for the part. She really, really, really wanted this role. She got it. They rewrote the character for her, and that was a big criticism of the movie, because in the original book, I believe Dorothy was supposed to be 10 or 12. I think Mike told us that last week. And then Judy Garland was 16, and she looked a little too old to be, kind of throwing these temper tantrums. Annie, wah. But that problem is even more pronounced in this movie, because even though they age up Dorothy to be 24, Diana Ross is in her 30s when this movie is made. And whether she's in her 30s or her 20s, there are a lot of moments where she is still acting very childlike, and it just doesn't fit. And to be clear, Diana Ross is a fucking living legend. Diana Ross is amazingly talented as a singer and as an actress. Diana Ross was nominated for an Academy Award for her role in Lady Sings the Blues. That was a biopic about Billie Holiday that was critically adored, and Diana Ross was nominated for a fucking Oscar. And of course, as the lead singer of the Supremes, she had so many songs as a solo artist. She's amazing. She's 80 years old, alive and well. She's phenomenal. She is wonderful. But she was probably miscast as Dorothy in this movie.
I agree with that. It's a film about a child. They wound up losing the original director of this film because he disagreed with the casting of Diana Ross. The original director was John Badham. He wound up dropping out, and then Sidney Lumet, or Lumet, I don't know, how do you pronounce his last name?
I believe it's Lumet.
He replaced him. They made her a kindergarten teacher, which I guess kind of tries to maybe it makes her appear a little younger. And the film starts at Thanksgiving. It just seems very warm and loving. And there's this maternal the figurehead, Aunt Em. It's a 34-year-old woman at a Thanksgiving table who's unmarried, and that's a perfectly fine trope. Trust me, as a man in his 40s who's unmarried, I've definitely dealt with this. And I like this Auntie M cast, this actress.
Did she look familiar to you?
Yes, she did. And where is she from?
She is from Billy Madison. She's the one who says, "I thought I was your snack pack."
Yeah, she must be the maid. That's right.
Yes. Her name is Teresa Merritt.
Yeah, but Auntie M's original plea to Dorothy is she says, now you take this job, this new job. She wants her to be a high school teacher, a little more grown up.
Right.
And she'll find a new home for her and Toto. The point of the 1939 film was there's no place like home, and stay with the family. It's an interesting, immediate 180 from what Wizard of Oz is trying to establish, 1939.
Right. This Dorothy is clinging to home too much. That's her problem. She is the opposite problem of the Dorothy played by Judy Garland. Okay, I'm into that. And I also like the fact that this movie, like you were saying, it starts from a family that is filled with love. There's no antagonist. There's no mean Mrs. Gale who wants to kill Toto. There's not a villain that Dorothy has to run away from. Her struggles are internal. She is afraid of leaving the nest. And they talk about how she's never been south of 125th Street. And that blows my mind. I know that there are people who are adults who have never left the country, who have never left their state. But if you live in New York City and you've never left your neighborhood, I mean, come on. New York City has the best public transportation system in the world. She's never taken a fucking subway downtown. That's crazy. That's mind-blowing. But I understand that framing of Dorothy more than I understand that she's a kindergarten teacher who needs to be a high school teacher. That whole line of thinking is just mind-blowingly stupid to me. I mean, being a teacher is a noble, incredible profession. And that's true if you're a kindergarten teacher or a high school teacher. Why is Aunt Em so hung up on she needs to quit the job as a kindergarten teacher and take the job as a high school teacher? I do not understand that at all. I think they really should have just kept it to, you've never left Harlem, you need to see the world outside Harlem. That is much cleaner and much easier to just understand.
I think they had to do gymnastics. I think had Stephanie Mills, the lead actress from the Broadway musical, had she been cast, I don't think they would have done any of this stuff to a 19-year-old. She would have played, maybe not a 14-year-old, but she would have played a teenager. She would have played a 16-year-old or so. They had to do something to try to make her seem like she has to grow up. I don't know. You just think of a professor at a college as having, white hair with a monocle versus a kindergarten teacher as maybe being a younger person. I think that's the stereotype they were trying to lean in because they were trying to just move the goalpost to try to fit Diana Ross into this role of Dorothy, who's supposed to be a teenager.
Yeah, but there's a big difference between you should be a college professor and you should be a high school teacher. It's just weird.
We have to talk about how Dorothy gets to Oz. I think it looks a little bit worse than the Twister coming in 1939. It's this incredibly lame twister of a blizzard twister that only goes down the middle of this road in New York City.
Yeah.
And it doesn't do anything. We don't see like lampposts turning around or falling over. We see a close-up of Diana Ross kind of going, ah, and I think the camera spins around a little bit and she falls through a OZ Oz logo and she falls into a sand pit.
Yeah. It's also just a weird thing because there aren't blizzard tornadoes in Manhattan. Like,
there's no such thing as a twister blizzard.
Yeah, a twister blizzard, a snow-nado. I don't know. We can workshop that. But when she gets to Oz, the Munchkin sequence is, I think, really cool. And that scene shows off something that we're going to see a lot of in the movie, which is choreography. There is a lot of really intricate dance sequences throughout this movie. And I'm not the world's best dance critic. I'm not a connoisseur of choreography, but you can tell that this is incredible. This is well choreographed and well danced stuff. The problem is it is shot really poorly. There's these big wide shots. It's really dark. It's just hard to see what's going on. And even though I appreciated the choreography, I was like, man, they could have done a much better job in filming this.
Absolutely. How the hell are you going to see anything on a standard def 13-inch television? And that's what this film was made for, to go on the $10 million CBS rights that they sold it for. Whoever made the decision to make all these wide shots, I really didn't like a lot of these dance sequences, because I think what he might have been going for is, what does this look like when you're in the back row of the upper level, where you could see all this lovely dancing and you could tell it is amazing. Look at these like 200 people like dancing in unison and doing all these spinning moves. It's cool on a macroscopic scale where I could see it, but oh my God, I didn't see a single one of these talented people's faces.
Yeah, it's a weird sequence, but I want to get to Michael Jackson. The thing about him as a scarecrow, I think it's deliberate because of the whole nature of his song and the way he's being tormented by the crows, but he is not at all connected to that pole. It is very, very clear that he is sticking his arms through these circles and, he's asking the crows for help. Can you please let me down? Please let me down. And they say no. And then they make him sing the song called You Can't Win, which is like, it's just futile. You're never going to be able to do that, which apparently that song was later in the Broadway musical. Or actually, I don't even think it was in Broadway. I think it was in a different iteration of the musical. It was during the Wicked Witch part of the show about how it was pointless to resist her. But then they cast Michael Jackson. Quincy Jones wanted to give Michael Jackson a solo song, which makes sense. And so they moved the song from the Wicked Witch part to the Scarecrow part. It's a good song, but it feels weird because he could very easily just move his arm slightly and come down. And I think that's kind of the point, which is that he didn't believe in himself and he needed that confidence, because then Dorothy comes over and says, hey, I'll help you down. And she really doesn't do much. He just had to believe that he could let himself down. But I felt like there should have been a string or a rope or something.
It's not even a shackle. You're literally just leaning on this pole pretty much.
Yeah. I like the costume design. I like the way that the Scarecrow looks. I'm a sucker for Reese's Peanut Butter Cups. I like the thing on his nose. I think it's cute. He and Diana Ross, I think, have very good chemistry together. Then we get to the Tin Man. The Tin Man is played by Nipsey Russell. I knew him from game shows, Hollywood Squares, things like that. He's brilliant. He's like a poet. He was. He's no longer with us. But when the movie started, I noticed that the movie was rated G, which, I guess is fine. Nowadays, most kids' movies, family movies are rated PG. But for a movie that's rated G, the Tin Man is pretty sexual. His song about oil, yeah, that was pretty damn risque. Did you notice that?
I didn't know. What are some of the lyrics? Do you have a few?
Yeah, let me read some lyrics for you. Slide some oil to me, I'm beginning to feel just fine. Slide some oil down my throat and let me lubricate my mind. Go ahead, hit my shoulder blades. Those who don't have to lubricate sure got it made. He can't be in the same position because he's been in the same position so long that he needs lubrication. He's getting a little sore. The position that he's been in is underneath Teeny, his fourth wife, who's a giant metal robot who is basically sitting on him. God, the way he talks about his wife, Hatini, Hatini, Hatini. It's so fucking annoying. And I don't think that's like a Nipsey Russell problem. It's just that he does it in such a high-pitched voice so many times. It's like, I just want him to stop talking about fucking Teeny.
Yeah, I like Nipsey Russell. His singing ability is not the best, but they give him 2 solos and Michael Jackson 1 solo. I thought that Ted Ross as the Lion, I could tell this is an actor that's been doing this for a while on the Broadway the scene. I'm a mean old lion. That was one of the catchier songs, in my opinion. And I thought Ted Ross did a very good job with that.
Right, and he was in the Broadway production of The Wiz, and he was, I think, one of the few people who they brought from the Broadway musical to the movie. Yeah, he does a great job. The thing about the Lion, and really all of the 3 friends, Scarecrow, Tin Man, and the Lion, it is very, very, very clear that these characters have the thing that they are saying that they don't have. I said something similar last week, but the Scarecrow is quoting all of these brilliant thinkers. You know, he's finding the paper inside of him. Yeah, he's just quoting other smart people, but he knows what these quotes mean. He understands their relevance. That takes intelligence. The Tin Man says he doesn't have a heart, but he is so very heartbroken about his beloved Hatini. Like, clearly he has emotions. So, you know, he has a heart. And I think it's the next scene after the Cowardly Lion is introduced. They're in the subway, and yeah, the Cowardly Lion runs away, but then everyone's like, hey, Lion, help. And then he runs and rescues everybody, and he punches those garbage cans, and he rescues them from the tile towers of the subway. So it's pretty clear that, yeah, he gets scared sometimes, but he does have courage. And that subway scene is ridiculous. I mean, it is so bizarre and trippy. And it's also the first time in the movie where there's real danger, at least for Dorothy, because the crows are harassing the Scarecrow earlier. But this is the first time that Dorothy is in trouble. It's different from the 1939 Wizard of Oz, where the Wicked Witch is after Dorothy right from the beginning, and we know that she's going to be popping up throughout the movie, causing chaos. This movie doesn't have that, and it's just like this random dude who shows up in the subway who makes these two inflatable toy-looking things that start chasing them, and then the garbage cans with the teeth, I mean, those look so fucking bad. I mean, come on. It's weird, and it's not threatening, and also no one talks about it afterwards. Like, when they escape, there's no conversation about, hey, what the hell was that? Who are these guys? Why are they trying to kill us? There's no kind of conversation about what just happened to them.
Yeah, the garbage cans are comically poorly done. However, I thought that the scene was surprisingly almost scary. Certainly, I would probably be scared as a kid.
Oh, yeah?
There are these wires that come down from the ceiling and attack the Tin Man. And I thought that was kind of scary. I mean, it was a little bit Superman 3-esque.
Yeah, I get that. I could see how if you really like the Tin Man and then you see him getting electrocuted, that's terrifying. When they finally get to the Emerald City, we again have more brilliant choreography. Again, it's terribly shot. You really can't get a full sense of what these dancers are doing, other than it's impressive. They filmed on location at the base of the Twin Towers, which is an amazing location, but you don't really get the scope of it because it's filmed at night, it's really dark, and you're just seeing these dancers on the plaza. The towers are there, but it feels like a waste of a location. Like, they could have done this on a soundstage. They didn't have to do it on location. It's just a fucking waste. I like the idea of how the people dance, where it's just the Wiz saying, we like green, and then they all love green, and they sing about how much they love green, and then the Wiz says, no, actually, it's red now. And so then instantly they're all into red, and red has always been the best thing ever. I think there's something to that of people just believing whatever dear leader tells them to believe, and that is what they love and what they always have loved. That kind of big picture point I liked. I thought that was the coolest thing about this scene. Also, by the way, did you catch the symbolism of the green, yellow, and red?
Yeah, it's like the African colors.
Yeah.
That scene was fine. I think my problem is the next scene with the Wiz, Richard Pryor. And, you know, when you're going to make a musical into a motion picture, I think the point is to kind of go all out, and you can do the things you can't do on a small stage on Broadway. Yeah. And right when I saw The Wiz, I was like, this is definitely from the Broadway play. And it turns out it is. It's one of the few things that they brought directly. You made a cardinal sin, in my opinion, and that's the wizard in this movie, The Wiz. He looks way worse than the 1939 version. You can make it, you know, fit the theme of the film, but to put that Broadway prop in the middle of a $24 million film, it just looked so tacky.
I hear what you're saying. I think it looked impressive enough. It didn't really bother me. I thought that in this scene and the next scene, Richard Pryor's kind of wasted. He's not really doing his comedic shtick. And if he wants to do something different and more dramatic, that's okay. But the drama doesn't really land. I don't know. It just felt like you got Richard Pryor and you just kind of misused him or didn't use him the right way, I guess.
I don't think he has much to work with.
Yeah, exactly.
You're right. There was nothing funny about him. If you're going to cast a really funny guy, why not make him funny?
Yeah. The other thing that's weird about it is the Wiz tells Dorothy that he's not going to help her unless she kills the Wicked Witch of the West. And in The Wizard of Oz 1939, the wizard tells Dorothy to get the Wicked Witch's broom. And the way that Dorothy gets the broom in that movie is she kills the witch. But in this movie, it is explicit. You have to kill her. And there's a very quick scene where Dorothy's in a hotel room and she's thinking it over, and then the Scarecrow and the Tin Man and the Cowardly Lion come over and say, well, it's up to you. If you want to, we'll help you. If you don't want to, hey, we can just make a new life here in Emerald City. That seems nice. And she's like, no, I really want to go home. I guess I'll commit murder. And it's just like, it's such a weird fucking turn. It's like the Wiz says that she's wicked. Do we know that she's wicked, or just the guy who's telling you to kill her is telling you that she's wicked? I mean, Dorothy just kind of goes along with this attempted murder plot really easily. It feels disconcerting, and I think that the 1939 movie makers made the right call by having that wizard say, get me the broom. Okay, yeah, that's a dangerous thing. It's more believable that Dorothy would go along with that than to just go and do a murder.
I mean, we have not met this Wicked Witch at this point, right?
No, we haven't. And that's another really good point. She's not a threat throughout the movie like in the 1939 version. She doesn't appear in the movie until 1 hour and 32 minutes in. I jotted down the time code. It's 11 minutes later when she's killed. She is in this movie for 11 minutes. It does feel jarring, especially because we just watched The Wizard of Oz last week, and, that movie's kind of fresh in my mind. Like, the Wicked Witch of the West in this movie is definitely not this movie's antagonist. That's okay. Like I was saying earlier, I think it's interesting if this movie is more about Dorothy having an inward battle. She's dealing with her own demons about needing to go out into the world and leave Harlem and things like that. And there doesn't have to be an evil villain pulling the strings who wants to get her. I think that's okay. But if you are going to introduce this Wicked Witch who is, a villain of some kind that Dorothy, our protagonist, does have to defeat in battle, it's really weird to introduce her so late in the movie and then have her killed 10 minutes later or 11 minutes later. That just feels really, really strange.
She's a mean lady, but is it that she runs a sweatshop?
Yes.
I think she deserves to go to jail for this, but I mean, I don't know this character and I don't hate her enough. She's wicked, she is, but I mean, the Wicked Witch in 1939, I think is more of a sociopathic and like murderous witch, and she'll kill every one of you. Not she's really going to ignore the labor laws of the Land of Oz.
Yeah, 100% agree. Her song, Don't Nobody Bring Me No Bad News, is great. I really, really like that song. The dance after she's killed, when she's, by the way, flushed down a toilet, which I guess is her throne. A Brand New Day. The choreography, again, it's really amazing. Not super well shot. Also kind of sexy. They shed their winky outfits and then there are these gorgeous dancers in their underwear. Seems a little out of place for a G-rated movie, but whatever. And then while we're talking about characters who kind of come out of the blue, when they go back to the Wiz and the Wiz admits that he's a fraud, then Glinda, the Good Witch, suddenly appears. She is not the Good Witch who appears in Munchkinland. That's the other Good Witch. I think that was the Good Witch of the South. This is the Good Witch of the North. We have not met Glinda, the Good Witch, until this part of the movie, which is at the very, very, very end. And it's those three characters, the Wiz, the Wicked Witch, and the Good Witch, all of whom are important to this story, presumably, but they all appear in the last, like, half hour or so of this movie. I just had whiplash with all of these characters, these important characters, these seemingly important characters just being introduced at the very, very end of the movie.
Yeah, it did strike me as odd.
Right, right. When Glinda the Good Witch is talking to Dorothy and explaining her journey and how she needs to go home and everything, apparently that was all based on EST. I didn't really know much about it, but it was like this 70s self-help seminar / cult kind of a thing. EST stands for Erhard Seminars Training. Apparently, Joel Schumacher at the time was really into EST, and he put a lot of EST stuff in the movie, especially in this part with Glinda. And Diana Ross was really into it, so he kind of got away with it. But it just feels like a lot of platitudes. It's just a lot of, self-help nonsense, not really inspirational stuff that you would expect to hear from the Good Witch. Also, this song, the actress is Lena Horne. She can sing. She has pipes. It's very easy to imagine her belting out some Broadway show tunes on stage and the people in the back row being really impressed. In the movie, though, the sync is way, way off. Her lips are not moving along with the words. That's also kind of a problem throughout the movie with a lot of the actors. Really, everyone except Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson killed it. He worked very hard on that to make sure that his lips were moving with the song. Because, when they film it, they're not singing live. But with Lena Horne, Glinda, the Good Witch, it was just really noticeable. I think in part because there's just so many long shots of her face, there's not a lot of cutaways. You see it. Maybe I also noticed it more because at this point we were past the 2-hour mark and I was getting bored, but it's just a bad job getting her lips to match the music. Did that bother you?
I don't think I noticed it.
Okay. Glinda tells Dorothy to click her heels 3 times. She does. She goes home, and that's it. We see her walking down her street. We don't even see her going into her apartment, talking to Annie M. It just ends. I was ready for the movie to be done at that point, but I still felt like it needed one more scene. It needed that button at the end to wrap up her story. Is she going to take that job as a teacher because for some reason that's the thing Annie M wants her to do? Is she just going to say, hey, I'm going to leave Harlem. I'm going to keep my kindergarten teaching job, but I'm going to get an apartment in the East Village or something so she can experience the world. I don't know. It felt like a very abrupt ending.
I agree that there could have been a button at the end of the film that might have explained what happens a little better.
Yes. But James, let me ask you about The Wiz. Do you think this movie stands the test of time?
Well, first let me talk about what works in this film. I think that the Tin Man looks great. I think the lion, the wardrobe looks great. I think everyone, all the extras really have this appearance of being at a Broadway show. I think the lion, played by Ted Ross, is great. I don't think I'm saying anything new by saying that Michael Jackson is great. And I have been humming Ease On Down the Road for a couple days now, because I saw this film a few days ago. And it is just in my head. I even put it on Spotify at one point. Unfortunately, a lot of them are so boring. And I think the problem with this film overall is that it doesn't really do much to take this film from a Broadway musical to a live show. This is supposed to be a musical, a movie adaptation, or at least that's what I would have wanted to see a little better. But unfortunately, this was a boring Broadway musical to me. There's one banger with Ease on Down the Road, and the Michael solo's fine. I don't love it. It's fine, and I think the Lions it's fine, but it's one of the more memorable ones. Nobody Bring Me No Bad News. That's nice, but it just doesn't save the film. There's just too many times where I'm like, oh my God, this is just too long. They should have either kept better songs from the musical, if those exist, which I presume they do, or they should have just cut a bunch of these boring songs. For me, this was 2.5 hours of mostly not great stuff. The cinematography, I couldn't see anything in these grand things. I was just disappointed at what 40 years after 1939 presented. So for me, it does not stand the test of time. What do you think, Al? Does 1978's The Wiz stand the test of time?
No, it does not. And I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I felt like I was watching a bad adaptation of a good musical. I haven't seen The Wiz live. It was on Broadway, I think, earlier this year. It comes back a lot. All I have heard are great things about the stage show. And I can believe that the stage show is really, really impressive. This movie, though, isn't impressive. It's slow. It's boring. I think a lot of the roles are miscast. It's very poorly shot. I don't really get Dorothy's journey. In a way, it makes sense of she never leaves home, and now she's going on an adventure far from home. But does that mean that she's going to leave home? And if so, does that kind of negate the whole there's no place like home thing? Like, I think there's a way to do that and to kind of juggle what I think they're going for, which is that she misses her family and she loves her family, but she needs to go out on her own, and this adventure is going to help her understand that. I think that's what the movie was going for, but it does not come through at all. There's just a lot of this movie that doesn't stick the landing, and the movie is weird. It's filmed in a weird way. The characterizations are weird. The writing is weird. A lot of the plot mechanics are weird, specifically that the Wiz and the Wicked Witch and the Good Witch don't show up until the very end. It's all just poorly done. I'm blaming Joel Schumacher. From what I read, he did a terrible job of adapting the musical in terms of story. He didn't touch the book from the Broadway musical, which apparently was great. He decided, no, I'm just going to do my own thing. I think I know a little bit better about the Black experience and all of these Black people. So thank you very much for that, Joel Schumacher. I would 1,000% go and see The Wiz live. I wouldn't let this movie prevent me from doing that. I would imagine that it would be great. Even if it's not great, I would have to assume it's better than this. No, I don't think that this movie stands the test of time. One little thing that's kind of behind the scenes about this movie that definitely stands the test of time. This was in the news a lot recently because Quincy Jones just passed away. In a lot of his obituaries and write-ups and things about his career, they talked about the 3 Michael Jackson albums that he produced, Off the Wall, Thriller, and Bad. Quincy Jones doesn't produce Off the Wall, Thriller, and Bad were it not for The Wiz. I think I read something that maybe they had met once before this movie, but this is where they became friends. This is where Quincy Jones became really impressed with Michael Jackson and his commitment to the role, his workmanship, his talent, his singing voice. And Michael Jackson was similarly impressed with Quincy Jones. And when it was time to make Off the Wall, he called his buddy Quincy Jones and said, hey, will you come produce it? So the fact that this movie led to that specific pairing is monumentally important for the history of pop music. I mean, sorry that sounds hyperbolic, but I do think that's true. So, that connection definitely stands the test of time. But the movie itself, 1978's The Wiz, the motion picture, no, that does not stand the test of time. But that's going to do it for us this week. Next week, we're going to be talking about a movie that's celebrating its 25th anniversary, Magnolia. Special guest Adam Pincus is going to join us. He's coming back on the show. It's been a minute since he's been on. He loves Paul Thomas Anderson, and he's really excited to come and talk about Magnolia. Magnolia is a movie I saw once, and I remember very, very little about it, but I'm excited to revisit that. Have you seen Magnolia, James?
No, I just know Tom Cruise is in it, and PTA directed it.
Yes. So I am looking forward to that episode. In the meantime, we want to hear from you. We are at Test of Time Pod on Facebook, X, Instagram, and Threads. Hey, it's Thanksgiving weekend. You know what I would be thankful for? If you wrote us a nice review on Apple Podcasts. Just takes a second to just say a couple quick words about the show. It helps other people find us. Thank you in advance for doing that. And we'll see you next time, everybody.
Bye.